which cornerback would you sign for next season, Carlton Davis or Darius Slay, if Slay were to become available, which is the story today?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the fact that the Nostalgia Act, I understand because people perceive that he was slighted from the old regime. Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn didn't understand talent, didn't understand culture, and they made the decision to trade him. And I think he was a fan favorite. He was part of a regime that really some tough times in Motown. But I think clearly that Carlton Davis, I think, is an upgrade when you look at what he brought to the table, a physical corner that wants to play man-to-man and can lock down the opposition's number one. I think that he's going to be coveted, and it's going to be tough to bring him back. I think teams like the Jets, Jaguars, other AFC, NFC squads should look to make him a healthy offer. But I think when the Lions are looking at their free agent priorities, I think Carlton Davis is one that you would want to back on this, especially with Kelvin Shepard being a first-year defensive coordinator. Some familiarity, I think, would be great. But if they went out and brought back Darius Slay, I would understand it. But he's 34 years old, slowing down. I understand the loyalty that Detroit fans have to players that were on this roster, but he didn't play a whole heck of a lot of man-to-man with the Eagles, and his numbers against the run, not the best. So I would be okay if they went in the draft or somewhere else with a defensive back.
Doc, I agree with you 100% talking about those Jets. They lost DJ Reed, and he's a hell of a defensive back, so replacing him is priority. Let's just stick with the Lions in terms of replacing their own people. Who are players on this team that you would want to bring back, that you would be willing to bring back this particular year because you value where they are and where their price point is for the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, first and foremost, like we talked about, Carlton Davis. I do think Kevin Zeitler, and look, I'll just preface it by saying I'm kind of, if I was going to be a GM, right, once a player turns 30, I'm sorry, this is a young man's game. So I'm looking to Christian Mahogany to replace Kevin Zeitler. I'm looking for a replacement for Graham Glasgow. I thought his numbers last year were a detriment to the offensive line. I'm looking to go younger in regards to the offensive line. Clearly, I look at Derek Barnes as a fit. I think he's the player that you can count on potentially coming back. I think that he's got a very close bond with Alex Anzalone. And now that your former position coach, Kelvin Shepard, is going to run the defense, I think that Derek Barnes, hopefully his rehab is going great. And I think he's going to face an opportunity to maybe take a prove-it deal in Detroit. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that he'll return. And then you're going to look at, with the Lions is going to be, I think the big issues are going to be which of the high-end players are you going to allocate the big money to? And the three biggest candidates are Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby Joseph, and Jamison Williams. So I think that Aiden and Kirby are going to command big dollars. I'm wondering about Jamison Williams because of the fact that he's had those suspensions. I'm wondering if they're going to allocate those big dollars to him. But I would assume at this point it's going to be Aiden and Kirby Joseph getting some hefty raises.
And, I want to expound on that point, Doc, because the Lions do feel like they are at a critical period in their turnaround, in their window, where they do have to make some decisions. They can't re-sign Kevin Zeitler. They can't re-sign a Graham Glasgow. They need every dollar possible in order to re-sign some of these big name players. Every dollar possible and they'll probably lose. There's no question. I think they would lose a guy like Levi Onwuzurike as well. They can't re-sign all these guys.
Absolutely. You said it. I think the two candidates that people would also look at on the free agency list, Ifeatu Melifonwu, a good player, but not available. And Braylon knows your best ability is availability. Absolutely. And I just think he's a good player. I think he has a chance for a future if he stayed healthy. But given where the Lions are at with two young safeties that are productive, I think Ifeatu Melifonwu and Levi Onwuzurike are candidates that I would put as a prediction as being guys that will not be here in 2025. You're absolutely right. They have to be wise. And unfortunately, that's what Brad Holmes told everybody. He's like, look, we got to pay our own guys. And that's been the motto. And we can debate the value of doing that versus high-priced free agents externally. But the Lions have been successful in the model that they have in draft and develop. So I do think that Brad Holmes is loyal to the players that produce at a high level that were drafted.
And you talk about that, guys that produce and produce at a high level. You had mentioned his name a minute ago, Jameson Williams. I think this guy is the really where the wiggle room begins and ends, right? Because you cannot re-sign everybody, but when you see what this player gives this offense, there are a lot of wide receivers out there. There are very few wide receivers in football that have that kind of speed, that can do what he does. And, oh, by the way, it is a prerequisite, as Braylon always says, to be a wide receiver on this team, you have to block for this team. He does that as well.
Yep.
I think you almost have to re-sign him right now. I know you can't re-sign anybody, but I go back and forth on this, Doc. I think you've got to re-sign J-Mo.
Yeah, no, look, the great opportunity that he's got is that there's a fifth-year option. So there's an opportunity. It would be hefty at, I think, near $18 million. But you have an opportunity to keep him longer in town and wait and see what he brings to the table. I think Jameson Williams is part of the future. I do think that he opens things up for Jared Goff, makes him a better player. And I just think this year, clearly last year's goal was to firmly establish J-Mo as a number 2 wideout. He accomplished that. Now, the suspension didn't help. And some of the suspensions have just been for a lack of attention to detail, but that's still part of your job. When you're getting compensated at that level, I think that, the numbers that people would throw out would maybe be 4 years, $80 million or so at the starting point for Jameson Williams in that $20 million a season range. But I think you wait and see. You make him play well again in 2025 with the new offensive coordinator. You decide that, hey, if you can play all 17 games, mind your P's and Q's, make sure that you're not getting in trouble, it's a player worth it. I think that he's developing. And, one of my last questions to the coaching staff before the playoff exit was, hey, how does J-Mo get to that Justin Jefferson level? How does he get to that point where he's the number 1, up his numbers? I think he's got that potential. It's got to be expected. It's got to be targeted. I think that he should be. He's up there with the likes of a Justin Jefferson. And I think that as long as the off-the-field stuff and the attention to detail is there, I think J-Mo is going to be part of the Lions' future for a long, long time.
Hey, Doc, it's tough being a Lions fan, Let's face it. They won 15 games last year, and it took them to the last freaking half of the season, the last half of the last game to clinch that division. The division's getting better. That's just what being a Lions fan is. They're playing great football, and here they still have to fight to try to win their own freaking division. The Eagles, Super Bowl champs, they're going to get better. Washington is getting better. There are teams around them that are closing the gap. The window, we always say, is there because the Lions are young. But it's closing as well. So when I throw out Myles Garrett's name to you, and he's the elephant in the room, and you hear Philadelphia is making some moves, trying to make some inroads to get him, how do you let a guy like that go to another team that you have to contend with when, in fact, we heard the Lions were really the leader knocking on the door at the trade deadline last season to try to get him? They settled for Darius Smith. Do you think it's possible that they go out and get this guy?
Yeah, and that's the question. Basically, I asked Brad Holmes directly, and we got into a little bit of a back and forth, and he went philosophical on me and said, why do you want me just to get one, Myles Garrett? I could get 2 or 3. Well, I understood the spirit of what he was saying in regards to, I can't just say we're one player away, because that puts all the pressure in the world on Myles Garrett. It puts the pressure on the Lions to actually have to accomplish something. But here's the first and foremost, okay? It was tough for the Lions to exit that way. And then to see how the Eagles were able to win with the front 4 without blitzing. Okay, but if you followed Lions on SI, if you followed my staff, we put out there a story before the playoffs, 3 reasons why the Lions are not winning the Super Bowl. And one of the reasons my guy Vito, who's very honest and objective, said was the pass rush wasn't good enough. It hasn't been good enough. And so for Brad Holmes, look, he does a lot of things well. There's nobody going to sit up here and not credit Brad Holmes for where he got this franchise from being abysmal and irrelevant to now we're talking next level stuff. Okay, and next level is now you're not compared anymore to the piddly old Lions. You're not compared to the Cardinals. You're not compared to the worst teams in the league. You're now compared in the upper echelon class with a Howie Roseman, with a Veach from Kansas City, with teams that are very solid amongst the elite. And now The next question is going to be for the Lions. How do you go from being a good team that gets to the postseason versus a team that can be consistently a Super Bowl winner? And I think you got to be more aggressive. So for everybody that's listening, I think you should want Myles Garrett. It's Brad Holmes' job to deliver. And I think that everybody that's listening or paying attention, why would you not want an all-pro, out-of-this-world defensive end that's going to destroy the quarterback and make life better for your defense, make life better for your offense? You should want as many good players on this team as possible.
Preach.
And if you got to sacrifice a player or two, so be it. But it's Brad Holmes' job. So, but I also understand the argument that people have. Well, if you sacrifice picks, maybe you take a step back. Maybe you don't have the success. Maybe you fail. But I'm of the opinion you take the swing and you go for that one or two opportunities to win a Super Bowl. And if you trust your GM, hey, if you take a swing on a Myles Garrett and you lose Barnes, Ifatu, you lose Carlton, and you get Myles Garrett, I'm all for it. I'm all for taking the swing for one and worry about the sustained success later. So I'm all for Myles Garrett. I think that it's going to be tough to execute that. I think the odds are low that he'll end up in with the Lions, but you just have to trust, if you're a Lions fan, you got to trust that what Brad is selling is effective, which is draft and develop and take calculated risks. But in my humble opinion, I'm all for being a little bit more aggressive in free agency, and I do think they should. Clearly, their free agent strategy's got to be a little bit more aggressive, less selections of guys that have a previous history of injury, and in the draft as well, no projects. Yes. All guys that can listen. They're not all gonna start, but they have to compete to start. Because you could argue there are 3 draft picks on Hooker, on Broderick Martin that were wasted picks that did not help you win a Super Bowl. The proof's in the pudding. We're all sitting here wondering where's the ring. And I think that with a couple different maneuvers, we could argue that the Lions could already have their ring.
Talk that stuff, Doc.
No doubt. And look, one of the things that I said over the last week, Doc, is that you cannot draft your way to a championship. You just can't do it. You have to take a swing. Maybe it's not Myles Garrett, but it's got to be somebody else. I mean, the Eagles, they've been to, prior to last year, they've been to 2 Super Bowls in 7 years with different quarterbacks and different head coaches, and they took a swing on Saquon Barkley. San Francisco, no, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they took a swing on Christian McCaffrey. It was a trade in season. Teams that do this need somebody to help them get to that point. And I have yet to find a team not quarterbacked by Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes that hasn't taken a swing and drafted their way to a championship. It just doesn't exist.
You're absolutely right. And so what you're saying is that the free agency strategy externally, the Lions are cautious. They are cautious in giving those high-priced dollars to guys that have been not drafted and not part of the deal. And I do think that strategy, you could argue, has been detrimental. I do think that they need to be more aggressive in targeting free agents. They can do better in regards to targeting higher price. And guys, and I think what the Lions are scared of is, you look at it and you say, well, what if there's attrition and what if this happens? I look at it like typically the guys that you're going to want to pay are good players. But the problem is there's competition for those players, and there's a lot of reasons why free agents may not come to Detroit for playing time, for monetary reasons, things like that. And also, guys, remember, I think when Dan Campbell said it, it also could be a detriment. When he said not everybody can play for the Lions, what does that mean? The Lions want guys that are all in hardcore and want to practice like they've never practiced before. Like we're talking practices that will put most average NFL players in the ground. That's how hard the Lions practice. That doesn't suit everybody's needs. And so that's why the Lions are looking for a specific type of player. But you guys are right. I think the rigidity of their free agency strategy has been costly. But I think moving forward, I think there will be some adaptations and adjustments. You're absolutely right. Time to take some swings. Time to bring more talent to this roster. We all should be clamoring for more at all times.
Yeah, Doc, this really isn't a question. This is just how I agree with you. You got to take a swing at some point. And if you want to sit here and look at the examples, there's plenty of examples. You look at the Denver Broncos when they won it. They went out and got DeMarcus Ware in the offseason. They pick up DeMarcus Ware. It makes it that much easier for Von Miller. Look what the Rams did. They went and got OBJ and Von Miller. during the season. Alshon Jeffrey to the Eagles 9 years ago. They couldn't stop Alshon Jeffrey. I don't know why they didn't play Malcolm Butler. But to that point, you have to take a swing at some point. And there's countless examples of teams showing you take this swing at will and can potentially pay off. Sorry,
and Tampa Bay, by the way, just to your point, Braylon, Tampa Bay, as Cody Ingalls said, they signed AB and Gronk, and that was Brady as well. But they went out and got AB and Gronk too.
Even the Chiefs did it. For as much as we make about the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, well, they went out and got Frank Clark. Frank Clark, I always bring it up.
That's right.
He's the all-time leading playoff sack leader. He went to the Chiefs and got busy.
So,
Chiefs
Doc,
win.
as good as they draft, they fail on their free agency. They do. They absolutely fail. And they cannot flail anymore. They've got to go out. Don't give me injured players anymore. Don't give me Emmanuel Mosley's anymore. Please.
Davenport.
Absolutely. You guys are absolutely right in regards to free agency can be better. But first, let's always credit Brad Holmes for what he's able to do in the draft. You do think potentially, hey, maybe Broderick Martin, you hope that Casey Rogers is able to work magic with some of these developmental players, with Manu, with some of these guys if they've targeted. But you could argue that, Manu, Hendon Hooker, and Broderick Martin, if they were three more impactful young defensive linemen, you could also say that, hey, you can draft your way to a championship if you draft the right guys. The Eagles drafted some guys as well that were flops, but the efforts that they made to draft young, hungry defensive linemen have been fruitful, and they've all paid off. So, look, in the end, remember, this is still early, year 5 now with this regime. I think adaptations will be made, and I think that you can learn lessons each and every year. The Lions are going to have a lot more cracks at it, but we can make the argument that one got away in 2023. That year where they lost to the 49ers was a Lions year. That's a wasted year. Last year, the injuries, it was attrition. It's a bad luck year. But I do think the Lions could have had a Super Bowl in this window if it was done differently. But it doesn't preclude me from saying that the Lions have a great GM, one of their best of all time. I do like the way that they're able to stock this team with talent. But we're talking about the highest level of decision-making. You got to be one step ahead of a genius in Howie Roseman. And you got to be able to take some calculated risks and be able to close the deal. Like, what's wrong with me saying, hey, what's wrong with Maz and Braylon and you guys and Ryan saying, hey, go out and bring Myles Garrett here. That's the job of the general manager, is not to I don't personally care if he calls. I reported that on last Wednesday. Yeah, they called. That's great. That's the basic floor of what your job is. Call and find out. But to me, as a fan, as a reporter, my next step is, can you close? Because it looks like to me, Brad Holmes, and the metaphor is, he's the kind of the guy that goes for a house and is kind of like, yeah, it's too expensive, goes to the next house, too expensive. He wants to window shop 15 houses and is like, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. No, not in my price range. Meanwhile, you got these rich dudes with cash coming in and buying every single house right in front of you going, hey, if I want something, you go out, you got to pay for it. And Brad's kind of trying to find value and try to find the perfect fit. Hey, sometimes there's going to be a cash buyer, and the cash buyer is Howie Roseman, and he don't care about your feelings about value. He just wants the best players. And so, Brad Holmes, pull out your dollars and stop worrying about the value. Close the deal. Close the deal by now. Let's go.
That's a mic drop right there, Doc. That's a mic drop. John Dak Macaroon joining us here on Woodward Sports, Ermanni Edwards and Maz. All right. Can we officially call the Hendon Hooker experience a flop? I mean, we're hearing it all out there. Joe Milton, who is a backup quarterback with the Patriots, supposedly is garnering so much trade talk right now. He could be the best quarterback in this draft class, and he's already played a year and won a game for the New England Patriots. Meanwhile, our guy, Hendon Hooker, got benched for a high school coach in a playoff game. Is it over?
Okay, now look, this is one of those deals where I know the favorite position to talk about is the backup quarterback, the backup goalie. But in the end, if Hendon Hooker was playing, something's wrong because you paid Jared Goff to do the job. So in the end, Hendon Hooker's job is a developmental quarterback. His job is to just get a little bit better should something happen to Jared Goff. Now,
it did. It did.
Well, he played bad, but you're not going to pull him for Hendon Hooker. So,
no, Doc. He didn't play in the playoff game when Goff went out with a with a concussion, basically went to the blue tent. They brought Teddy Bridgewater in. Hendon Hooker was an emergency quarterback.
Absolutely. And so I understand. Look, coaches like veterans, they understand where they're at. It does send the bad signal, clearly, when you bring back Teddy Bridgewater. But that was the plan all along. Teddy and Hendon are close. So it's not as – I understand the way in which it's perceived. It's bad. But I look at it from the perspective of the Lions developing a quarterback. It's okay. It's one of those situations not as bad as people perceive it to be, because you want Jared Goff. He gives you, for the next 3 years, your best chance to win a Super Bowl. So, yes, but here's the question you're asking. Do I think that there's better options out there to bring here to compete? Absolutely. And they should always look to do that. But I look at it from the perspective of when you give Jared Goff that contract, it kind of makes the backup job irrelevant, because for the Lions to have the chance to win the most games, to compete at the highest level, you want to give Jared Goff as many weapons as possible. Look, Hendon Hooker is just a player at this point in time who's inexperienced at this level, but he does have a factor that people like with his mobility. But I would not be surprised at all if the Lions bring a Jalen Milroe or somebody else in that's a veteran to compete. It's all about competition. But I think where your question lies, it's fair. In 2025, if Jared Goff goes down, the Lions are still at this point.
Doc, you bring up Jalen Milroe. That's exactly where I want to go before we get you out of here. I know you were down there at the Combine. Lions, all defense. That's been the talk. Defense. Maybe offensive lineman here, there, somewhere. There was a lot of showing out, man, by these defensive linemen as well as some linebackers, which are two spots I really think Detroit should focus on. Where they're picking. What did you see? Were you excited at what you saw? Because I got a couple names, man, and I'll just let you go.
Yeah, man, it was great. The deepest class is in along the defensive line, defensive tackles. We did a mock draft recently. We loved Jahad Campbell, what he did there. We love that spot at number 28. But in the end, I do think the Lions are going to walk away with this opportunity to draft in the trenches. I think that's where you need to go. I do think that there's a lot of depth along the defensive line to find that edge rusher that you could develop. I think the Boston College, Dominic, that last name is brutal for me. The 16 and a half sacks is unbelievable. He stood out at the Combine. You look at a Shamar Stewart, James Pierce, lots of players that stood out and have an opportunity to play well. Mike Green as well. I think that the defensive edge class has so many prospects that you could find multiple players even on day 2. So I'm confident. Now, if you just want to look at the other side, because, look, everybody's talking about all the edges and defensive linemen. I'm also in love with some of these offensive linemen. Josh, I as a state guy, give me credit, guys.
I'm wearing green today. I'm wearing green today. You see that?
I went to the Big House multiple times to scout Texas, to scout Oregon. And they have some linemen that would be monsters to add. Josh Connerly's great. Donovan Jackson, I think, would be solid. You realize that Gray Zabel could also be a target as well. So I'm very happy with what they could do in the trenches. I'm curious on day 2 and 3, what positions are they going to target? Because you also have needs youth-wise along the offensive line. You want depth at cornerback, at linebacker. So I think this draft, guys, book it. I think Brad Holmes nails it. It's going to have an A+ impact for many years to come. I think there's a lot of talent at spots where the Lions are looking, and there's so many good players. But, yeah, you got to answer the question, who's going to play opposite of Aiden? And while we all would love it to be Myles Garrett, if it's a young player, I think you can get some value too, even in free agency too, which hopefully if we talk again, maybe next week we'll start to talk about free agency.
F those picks.
The DOC, the great John Doc Macaroon, covers the Lions for SI.com on X at Detroit Podcast 1. DOC, baby. That's what's up. Thanks, my man.
Pleasure.
We appreciate talking again soon.
Appreciate it, man.
See ya, Doc.
Follow me at Detroit Podcast for all Detroit Lions coverage. I look forward to talking to you guys again. Go Green.
Good job, Doc. Not going to say that. I'm not going there.